Hey guys, my name is Rob Noire, and today I have a video for you all about my picks for the top 10 greatest video games of all time. Now this is kind of like a follow-up video to the one I put out a few weeks ago about the top 10 TV shows of all time. If you haven't seen that one and you'd like to, just click the eye up there and I'll bring you right to it. But obviously, being Rob Noire Gaming, I had to do a video about my favorite games of all time, the top 10 greatest games, at least that I've ever played. So I'm not going to set this one up too much, you probably know what to expect from a video like this. I will say though that this is just my personal opinion, and if there is a game that you think should be on this list that isn't, definitely let me know about it down in the comments below, and if I haven't tried it, I definitely will. So without much further ado, here are my picks for the top 10 greatest video games of all time. Coming in at number 10, Dungeon Keeper 2. So Dungeon Keeper 2 is a strategy game released in 1999 and created by Bullfrog. The game has a very similar premise to many other games of the time, for example Civilization or Age of Empires, except unlike in those games where you play the hero, this game you play the villain and essentially you're a devil. Now you spend the game building a really epic dark dungeon and trying to attract all these different kind of creatures to serve you. You have everything from goblins to skeletons to even the Horned Reaper himself. Now obviously this is Dungeon Keeper 2, which means there was a number 1, which a lot of people do prefer, and I understand why, because they didn't change a whole lot between 1 and 2, but overall I think Dungeon Keeper 2 is a more solid game, and if you're going to play any of the series, definitely go for this one. Nowadays, the idea of playing the villain and being on the side of evil, well, that's not really that unique of an idea, but back in these days, this game was like mind-blowing. Like, it was one of the only games to really do this, and especially on this scale. Like, the more evil you are and the more evil you play it, the better you do. Now, there was a third game in development, but unfortunately it never released. We're still waiting for it in 2018. And there have been a few additions to the series after DK2, such as like a really shitty mobile game. But honestly, if you want to have a shit ton of fun and be incredibly evil, pick up Dungeon Keeper 2. It's so much fun, and I think it's the best of the series. Number 9, Final Fantasy VIII. Now, of course, there had to be a Final Fantasy game on this list, and it really was a toss-up for me between 3, FF7, FF10, and FF8. But in the end, I went with FF8 because out of all of the Final Fantasy games that I've ever played, even to this day, it was the one that appealed to me the most and the one that made the most sense. You step into the shoes of Squall Leonhardt, and it pretty much plays out like most Final Fantasy games where you have a party, it's turn-based combat, you're getting better weapons, better abilities, better magic, better everything, and you're leveling up as you go. But the thing that was really unique about this game is that magic worked on a draw system, and the way this worked would be you would steal magic from the enemies that you're fighting or from specific draw points around the world. And you would take this magic for yourself and you can then use it. And so the game basically played out where the more time you spent drawing magic, the more powerful you became. So there was a lot of grinding, which is why some people didn't like this one, but the grind always made a lot of sense. It wasn't like you would level up and then all your stats would go up a random amount. It was like, no, you put in the time, you get all this magic, and then you have this magic. And then after that, you can assign this magic to your different stats and even your weapons, giving you like elemental attacks. It just made a lot of sense. The story is a little bit crazy, but I have to say the game really goes everywhere. I mean, it's a very diverse world with a lot of different people, different things you can do, tons of mini games. I mean, at one point you even go to space. There have been a lot of really good Final Fantasy games, and I've played the majority of the series at this point, but Final Fantasy VIII was the one that really grabbed my attention and really made me a fan of the Final Fantasy series. And while it is a bit dated and it does have some mechanics that might not jive with everyone, overall it's a really fun, really solid game, and one I would definitely recommend checking out. Who knows, maybe if we're lucky, someday in the future they'll also do a remaster of this one. Number 8, Grand Theft Auto Vice City. Now, a lot of people will say that Grand Theft Auto 3 is their favorite Grand Theft Auto, or San Andreas, but for me, even having played those, it's always going to be Grand Theft Auto Vice City. You fill the shoes of Tommy Vercetti back in the 1980s, and it plays a lot like pretty much any Grand Theft Auto game, where you're getting lots of money, you're stealing cars, you're killing people with AK-47s, you're doing crazy shit. But honestly, this game I felt was where they really had refined the mechanics enough for everything to feel smooth and fun, but it was also still challenging in a good way. And I know most people don't play a Grand Theft Auto game for the story, but I did really enjoy the story of this game. Like, there's a nice little plot twist in the middle that you don't really see coming that I thought was really well done. There's so many locations that you can explore, there's so many quests, so many things you can do, so many side missions, and one of the best things about this game is you do it all with a really amazing rocking 80s soundtrack. Like, this is the game that got me into 80s rock. So overall, this is just an extremely solid Grand Theft Auto game. It does have its flaws, it does have a few issues, but overall, I consider it to be an absolute classic, and I would highly recommend anybody play it who enjoys the Grand Theft Auto series. Number 7. Super Mario Odyssey. Now, this game is the most recently released on the entire list, and before in this place would have been Super Mario 64. But having almost 100%ed Super Mario Odyssey at this point, I have to say it does beat it. So Super Mario Odyssey is the latest in a long list of 3D Mario games, but this one really felt like they finally were able to do everything that they wanted. It reminds me a lot of Super Mario 64 because it doesn't really have that much of a gimmick. Like, most 3D Mario games do have a gimmick, like Mario Galaxy was the whole space thing, Super Mario Sunshine was your water pack. This one is basically just your 3D Mario in the world. The only gimmick really is the fact that you can throw your hat and take over enemies. But while you do use that a fair amount in the game isn't like built around that. That's just like an added bonus in the game. While in the other 3D Marios, the gimmick is the game, more or less. And I mean, really, there's not that much I can say about it. It's just a really well done 3D Mario game. If you've played a good 3D Mario game, you kind of know what to expect. But one of the great things about this one as well is that they take some of the really cool aspects of the other 3D Mario games, and then they like do little homages to them. Like, there's a level that's very similar to Super Mario Sunshine, so you get to have like the experience of Sunshine in HD, but just like a small taste, not an entire game, and it's like the perfect amount. You get to see Peach's castle in the Mushroom Kingdom, and it looks extremely similar to Mario 64. There's also a bunch of nods to like Mario Galaxy and just like even their 2D 8-bit games, their Super Nintendo ones. There's just so much crammed into this, and it's all extremely well done, and it's just a fantastic game. One of my favorite Mario games ever for sure. Number 6. Diablo II. Now, this game was a massive part of my childhood and even teenage years. Like, even years and years after it had been released, I would still hop into this game, start a new character, or go on Battle.net and play it some more. Like, it is so much fun. Now, this is a third-person action kind of hack and slash game released in 2000 by Blizzard, and it was really what put them on the map for me. Now, in this game, you choose from one of many different character classes, each which can use special unique weapons and armor to that class, and which have a very interesting and intricate skill tree. And each of these character classes plays extremely different. So really, you can play this game however you want. There's going to be a class that appeals to you. You like to run in with brute force? Go for Barbarian or Paladin. You like to stand back and let your minions do the work? Go for Necromancer or Druid. Now, as you go through this game, you're leveling up, getting more powerful skills, more powerful weapons, more powerful armor, you're getting new magic, you can customize your weapons, and the game has a decent story, but it's definitely not about the story, it's about the gameplay. And it is really just the most addictive game of this type that I've ever played. There was an online version where you could play with a bunch of people online, or you could also do local multiplayer, and playing it multiplayer is a completely different experience and even more fun, I think, than the single player. And there's just so much depth to this game where I can even go back now in 2018, almost 20 years after the game was released, and still have a great time. I really liked Diablo 1, Diablo 3 was alright, but Diablo 2, I mean, this game is where it's at. It really is a masterpiece, at least in my opinion. And the visuals, while not amazing, still have aged decently enough. Number 5. Skyrim. Now, I debated for a while on whether or not to include Skyrim or Oblivion in this spot, but in the end, I think it has to go to Skyrim. Now, chances are, if you know games, you know of this game. I mean, it's Bethesda's masterpiece. You get to design a character and you can choose from several different races, all of which have some slightly different abilities, and you can make it look however you want, even though you're mostly going to be playing this game in first person and that doesn't matter. But it's basically like you imagine Lord of the Rings meets Game of Thrones and throw it into a game. And the reason why I picked Skyrim over Oblivion, even though I personally think I like Oblivion a little bit more, is because Skyrim is simplified just enough to be extremely accessible to almost any gamer, while Oblivion gets a little bit more deep and intricate, and if you're not into that, you probably could get turned off, as well as the fact that the graphics look fucking terrible nowadays. Now, in this game, you can do anything. There's a billion different quest lines, most of which have different sides. Like if you want to play it evil, if you want to play it good, if you want to join this faction, if you want to join this one, if you want to join all of them, they give you that option. And like a lot of the games on this list, you're leveling up, you're getting better weapons, better gear, all of which you can customize to some extent. I mean, you can get a house, you can get a wife, you can kill your wife, you can do whatever you want in this game. And it's just a massive epic fantasy adventure, which plays extremely well, and the combat in this one is probably the best combat in the series to date. The music is extremely epic, like that Skyrim theme song is going to be forever etched into history, and no one will ever forget the first time they take down a dragon. It's so cool. Chances are you've played this game, but if you haven't, I mean, you really should. It is just a fucking amazing game. I would highly recommend. Number 4. BioShock. Now, BioShock is kind of like a hybrid first-person shooter, low-key horror game, and it's one that caught me completely by surprise. Now, this game, along with another one on the list, is what actually made me realize that first-person shooters can be awesome games and can tell awesome stories, and they're not just a bunch of young kids running around in Call of Duty screaming about how they fucked your mom. Now, you're trapped in like this quasi-futuristic city underwater. It's very like old-school 1930s, 50s themed, although it also is kind of futuristic. It's a really unique setting. It's called Rapture. And you're basically trying to fight your way out from this place that's just been overrun by these crazy madmen. And all the while you're getting, you guessed it, power-ups, new attacks, new abilities, but it's so unique. Like there was no other game at the time that really did this and did it well. And I mentioned that it's a low-key horror game. Well, that comes from the fact that it's incredibly easy to die, and some of the enemies, such as the Big Daddies, are super hard to kill and are just extremely freaky and scary, and like the first time you fight a Big Daddy, intentional or not, it sticks with you. And even to this day, I mean, this game has aged incredibly well. The graphics look good and the gameplay still feels tight and intuitive. And it is a first-person shooter, but the story is really powerful and really important. Like, this game plays a lot with the idea of morality and kind of like delaying gratification and doing the right thing. I mean, it's hard to describe without giving like exact plot details, but it does it all very well. In this game, even if you haven't played it, you've probably heard about the plot twist in the middle, which really was like a holy crap mindfuck. So honestly, if you haven't played this game, I would highly recommend. I still think to this day it is the best of the series and one of the best first-person shooters I have ever played. Number 3. Ocarina of Time. Now, this is another game from my childhood, but this is one that has held up through the test of time. Now, this was the first 3D Zelda game, and while it is very similar to its predecessor, A Link to the Past, it really took everything in a new direction and really set the stage for all the Zelda games that were to come in the future. Now, you take on the role of Link as a young boy, and you're basically in this massive open world where, again, you can pretty much do everything, although there is one main story that you're going to be following for the majority of the game. And the story is really, really good and really interesting. And like a lot of the other games on this list, there is a twist near the end. I won't give it away, but if somehow you've been living under a rock and you haven't been playing this game, there's a moment that's gonna make you go like, holy crap. And this game is just incredibly iconic. From the music, to the gameplay, to your horse, to just everything. It is so well done, and the story is so powerful. Now, at some point in the game, you actually turn into adult Link, and from that point onwards, you can actually jump back and forwards through time, and things you do in the past will affect things in the future, and they play with this mechanic extremely well. This game was incredibly ambitious and is extremely fun. Now, a lot of people consider this the greatest game of all time, and I definitely think it's up there. I mean, it's my number 3 spot. One of the reasons why I wouldn't give it the number 1 spot, though, is because the controls haven't aged the best. It was released on the N64, which obviously you have one joystick, you don't have full camera control, and it does play a little bit awkwardly. Even if you get it on like the Virtual Console or you get the DS remake or whatever, it doesn't play quite as well as you probably remember. But even despite that and a few other issues here and there, it's an amazing game. I mean, if you haven't played this thing, you're really missing out. My number 2 spot goes to another N64 classic, Banjo-Kazooie. Now, back in the days of the N64, a developer called Rare was king, and this, in my opinion, was their magnum opus, their masterpiece. Still, to this day, I don't think I have ever played a better 3D platformer. Now, the thing that set this game apart from its peers, the reason why I consider it head and shoulders above like Donkey Kong 64 or Mario 64, really any other 3D platformer at the time, is that the way it was designed was so genius. Now, this game is what's called a collectathon, meaning you're collecting tons and tons of items. In this one, it's notes, that's the main thing in each course that you're trying to get, and collecting these notes lets you open doors that lead to other stages, and to unlock these stages you're collecting jigsaw pieces, 10 of which are in every world, kind of like stars in Super Mario. But the reason why this game was always such an enjoyable experience is because they actually use the collectibles, the notes, to lead you to each new area. Most 3D platformers, you reach this plateau where you're like, I don't know what to do next, and you'll look around trying to find like some landmark or some weird thing you haven't done yet, but often you're not going to find anything and you're either going to get bored or you're just going to move on. While in this game, you look around and you immediately see those notes and you know, oh, I haven't been there, I haven't done that. And the way the game leads you along, but without like holding you by the hand, it's this really soft touch that they nailed it out of the park in this game. And now the game controls very well, even for an N64 game. The plot is very interesting. It's a weird twist on like the usual save the princess type idea. There's a lot of humor in this game, like tons of jokes. One that always grabbed my attention as a kid is the fact that if you skip the tutorial and then you say you want to do it again, the person who will give you the tutorial threatens to delete your game. And honestly, this game is just wonderful. I 100%ed this game as a kid more than 12 times on the N64. And if you want to try this game yourself, I would actually recommend picking up the HD remaster on the Xbox 360 or Xbox One. They didn't change that much, but the game does play in widescreen, and you do have that second control stick to move the camera freely, which makes the game even better in my opinion. Now, a lot of games have tried to do the same thing as Banjo-Kazooie. There's a lot of 3D platformers out there. There's a lot of good ones, but in my opinion, none have ever measured up. This is just an amazing game. I would highly recommend it. And so before we get to my number 1 pick, let's go through a few honorable mentions. And finally, my number 1 pick, Fallout 3. Now this is another massive open world game by Bethesda, the same people who did Skyrim, but this one is a first-person shooter set in a post-apocalyptic world which is using more or less 1950s technology. And while this is the third game in the series, it's a vast departure from the first two games. It's absolutely nothing like them, and if you didn't play the first two games back in the day, it's not gonna matter. You don't need to in order to understand Fallout 3. There was a sequel to this game, Fallout New Vegas, which I do think had a little bit of a better storyline to it, but Fallout 3 is always going to have a special place in my heart. Now, you're running through this post-apocalyptic world, picking up missions and quests as you go, trying to complete as many as you can, meeting all these very interesting, unique characters, some of whom are friendly, some aren't, some are friendly and then become not. And the game is really all about morality, doing the right thing or doing the wrong thing. And there's no better example of this than at the very beginning of the game. The first town you get to, there's a giant nuclear bomb, and now you can disarm this bomb and save the town, or you can take some money and destroy the town. And that really sets the stage for what this game is all about. And the main plot of the game, the thread pulling you along, is you're trying to find your father. But of course, in an open world game like this, the main quest doesn't really matter that much, and it's probably one of the least interesting parts of the game, and it's still actually fun and interesting to do. I put so many hours into this game, exploring every nook and cranny of the wasteland and the downloadable content, becoming so overpowered, getting literally everything you can possibly get. Like, I put in some serious time when it came to this game, and I don't regret any of it. And you can play this like a normal first-person shooter, or you do have this special targeting ability called VIII, which you can actually jump into, and it plays out like a strategy game, where you can aim at certain different body parts, and you have like a percentage to hit. And because you have so many different weapons that all play differently and all aim differently, it really adds this really unique element to the game that no other first-person shooter ever has done. And the cherry on top of this game is that, much like Grand Theft Auto Vice City, you play it all with this really unique, awesome soundtrack. This one, it's all from like the 1930s, and it really gives the game like such a unique, eerie atmosphere when you're just walking through the wasteland, killing zombies and monsters, or you just have like the dee in the background. It's just so cool. And so that's my list. Do you agree with my choices? Do you disagree? I'd definitely like to hear about it. These were just the 10 games that, out of all my favorite games, I really felt were the best and like the most iconic. I had a lot of games in consideration for this list, which you might have seen a little bit of in the honorable mentions, which I even had to cut down. But overall, I really feel like those 10 games were the ones that impacted me the most, and that I really feel were like the best out of all the games that I've played in my life to date. Of course, there's new games coming out all the time, so this list could be outdated in a few years. Maybe I'll put up an updated video. But yeah, guys, thanks a lot for watching. If you made it all the way to the end, I really appreciate it. And as I mentioned before, if you have any games that you think should be on this list, definitely let me know down in the comments below, because I'm always looking for new, great games. And again, if I ever do an updated version of this list, maybe they'll be on it. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and as always, I will see you in the next one. Hey guys, my name is Rob Noire, and today I have a video for you that's a little bit different from anything I've done before on the channel, but hopefully you'll like it. So as you probably know by the content, I am, yes, currently playing Donkey Kong 64. As you can see, I have Donkey Kong right here. This is overall a pretty mediocre game that kind of gets overhyped a lot.